Hello and welcome back. I'm Tony Costa from the Cross of Christ Ministry, and today I want to talk to you about the historical Jesus. Have you ever been challenged when you're sharing your faith or telling people about Jesus when you come up with there's no historical proof that this Jesus ever existed? And a lot of people are stuck for proof. They don't know. Well, tonight I hope to shed some light on that. The question of whether Jesus existed or not was generally settled in scholarship in the early 20th century. Today's scholars in the field agreed that there was a Jewish man called Jesus of Nazareth, and that he did exist in the Herodian kingdom of Judea in the subsequent Herodian tetrarchy in the 1st century AD, upon whose life and teachings today are known as Christianity. Today, there is historical evidence for the existence of Jesus of Nazareth and is generally accepted among scholars, both believers and non-believers alike. The evidence for the reality of Jesus and his existence includes writings by historians, artifacts, archaeological findings, eyewitness accounts. I'm going to go through a few first of the archaeological findings. The Galilee boat, or the Jesus boat, which was found in 1986 in Israel. This was a boat that was used at the time that Jesus and his disciples were in Galilee ministering. Then they had found the synagogue of Magdalene. Then they found the pool of Siloam where Jesus would go and tell them to bathe. They found Jacob's well. Now the temple in Jerusalem, they found the steps, the signs, and the stones. Then there was the Caiaphas ossuary, when they find the bones, if you will, of a 60-year-old man believed to be Caiaphas. And that comes from Matthew 26, verses 3 and 57, Luke chapter 3, verse 2, John chapter 11, verse 49. Then there's the Pilate stone, which is talked about in all four Gospels. The heel with a bone with a spike going through the foot, the heel of the person who was being crucified. Then they had the heel bone. There was the heel bone, and it was evidence that the Romans did, in fact, put people to death by crucifixion, which was a torturous way of dying. They found, the tomb of Jesus, the Holy Sepulchre, the Nazareth inscription, which was an edict from Caesar, and he had that the penalty for death or stealing or moving a body from the tombs was death. These are all these discoveries are related to Jesus in some way. Now, the earliest written accounts of Jesus was no later than 25 years after his death. That would have brought it to around 50 to 60 AD. Today, I want to look at evidence outside the Bible, at least 6 facts that remain historically accurate. Number 1, we have Jesus was a Jewish leader. 2, he claimed to be the Messiah, the Anointed One. We can read this. The Old Testament says that when the Messiah comes from Isaiah chapter 61, verses 1 through 2. And Luke in the New Testament, chapter 4, verses 16 to 21, when Jesus proclaimed that he was, in fact, the Anointed One. Number 3, he was executed at the hands of the Roman authorities. 4, he was worshipped by his followers. 5, the person of Jesus has influenced Western civilization, whether anyone likes it or not. That's factual. All the world religions acknowledge this Jesus. Now, as to whether he was a prophet, a holy man, a teacher of morality, the Messiah, or God incarnate, that's where the argument, if you will, comes up. These historians were both Christian and non-Christian, and they believed that Jesus was in fact a real person who lived and died in Israel some 2,000 years ago. The main question here is, was Jesus really who others believed him to be? Was he the Messiah, or just a prophet, or God in the flesh? Scholars differ on the historical episodes described in the Bible accounts of Jesus. However, all modern scholars consider his baptism and crucifixion to be historical facts. Now, Jesus is the designation of Jesus Christ, or Jesus the Christ. And he was an itinerant Jewish man who they said was a prophet from Galilee in northern Israel. He never traveled more than 200 miles from his home. And they're still talking and writing about this man. Jesus preached and claimed to be the promised Messiah, the anointed one of Israel, who was sent from God the Father to the Jewish people in Israel to establish his kingdom here on earth. Now, during that time in history, Jesus came to the Jewish nation only, and yet he acknowledged the Gentiles as his other sheep in the Gospel of John, chapter 10, verses 1 through 6, where he says, "My other sheep know me, will know me." It would not be until after Rabbi Saul, also known as Paul, after his Damascus Road experience, who would become the apostle to other nations. The other nations referred to the Gentiles. Gentiles are someone who is not a Jew. 4 specific verses where Paul says he is an apostle. He was not one of the original 12. Jesus had the 12. Judas betrayed him. Judas ended up killing himself. He hung himself. So in the book of Acts, they chose lots, and Matthias took Judas's place. But the 4 specific verses I want to give to you tonight is Acts chapter 9, verse 15, Acts chapter 13, verses 46 to 47, Acts chapter 14, verse 7, Romans chapter 1, 1 through 6. And you can see where Paul says, I am an apostle. He says, I'm least of the apostles, but for being the least of the apostle, he wrote 2/3 of the New Testament and much of the doctrine, if you will. A very interesting note here for me to make is there were 2 Jewish men who have made a profound impact on humanity. The first one would be Albert Einstein, who split the atom. Then there's Jesus of Nazareth, or Jesus Christ, who split time in half. BC before Christ, AD after his death, where they use today CE, the common era. I contend that if Jesus is not Lord, he's a liar, a lunatic, and the worst hoax that God could have allowed happen to mankind. My testimony here today to you is that Jesus was historical and he is alive today. I know because he touched me and changed my life. Telling you this by personal testimony. The main purpose of my book, Who Do You Say That I Am, is to share with those who do not know Jesus personally and to help them, those who do believe, to disciple them in their Christian walk. The reality is this: the author who pens or mentions Jesus, be they pagan, atheist, agnostic, Jew, Muslim, or Christian, would are fully convinced that Jesus Christ existed and that we are not following elusive butterflies, fables, or tales, but rather we are following the one true living God. Here I want to note 2 specific chapters for you to look up for yourself. The first chapter of the book of Hebrews, where the writer Paul talks about Jesus was God's supreme revelation. Then the writer of, that was in Hebrews, and the writer of Colossians, Paul. I personally believe that Paul wrote the book of Hebrews, by the way. When Paul was writing to the Colossians, he spoke about and wrote about the preeminence of Christ in the book, Colossians chapter 1. Then in John chapter 1, verses 1 through 5, where the Word, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, and how this Word created everything. Just something for you to look into for your own sake while you're doing your studies. Now, the Bible is a history book. It's his story. It talks about the fall of man, the plan of redemption and salvation in and through Jesus Christ because of his work on the cross of Calvary. vicarious atonement or substitutionary atonement, whatever term they want to give it. He took our place. We are sinners and he died for sinners. Now, Jesus is a central theme in the Bible from Genesis to Revelation. Now, let's look at the following men who wrote about Jesus throughout history. It can be very interesting because I'm going to give you non-believers, pagans, and then the believers. You have Africanus. He was 180 to 250 AD, born in Jerusalem, an early Christian scholar. He wrote about Phallus in his third book of his histories, where he refers to the darkness at the crucifixion of Jesus Christ and explained it away as a solar eclipse. Now, there's a range of interpretations on this matter, but for the sake of what I'm trying to show you today, that there was non-believers who wrote about this man called Jesus Christ. Tacitus, 56 to 120 AD, was a Roman historian and politician. He was known as the ancient world's most distinguished historian. He referred to Jesus' execution by Pontius Pilate and the existence of early Christians in Rome in his final works in 116 called the Annals. Then we have Pliny the Younger, 61 to 133 AD, where he writes in there, "They called upon the gods and supplicated to your image, which I caused to be brought to me. For what purpose? With frankincense and wine. They also cursed Christ, none of which these things it is said, and any of those that are already Christians be compelled to do so. I thought it fitting to let them go, but yet he crucified Christians." Then we have Flavius Josephus, interesting, 37 to 100 AD. He was a first century Roman Jewish historian in general. He fought in the Jewish War in 67 AD. When he wrote the Antiquities of the Jew, he was just trying to let the Romans know who the Jewish people were. He was born in Jerusalem. In his writings, The Antiquities of the Jews, as he describes the condemnation and the crucifixion of Jesus at the hands of Roman authorities. Then we have Lucian of Samosata, 125 to 180 AD. He was an ancient Greek satirist, schooled in rhetoric, and he was very hostile towards the Christians. So he would have absolutely no reason to write anything that would help Christians in any of the above passages. Lucian is actually mocking Christians for believing in a man who was crucified and died. He said that to him, Christians were a joke. How can you believe in somebody who's died on the cross as being your God? Is basically what he says. Suetonius, 69 to 122 AD, a Roman historian and court official during the reign of Emperor Hadrian. Basically, he wrote about Jesus, but he basically said that Jesus was a troublemaker. Then they have the Jewish Talmud. Specific references relates the trial and execution of a sorcerer. This comes from his writings, named Yeshua and his 5 disciples. The sorcerer is stoned and hanged on the eve of Passover. They referred to crucifixion on the cross as being hung on the tree. Jewish scholars believe that there are negative references to Jesus in the Talmud, but they are the direct response to the Christian hatred for the Jews back then. They believe that the Talmud statements are responses to the New Testament's negative portrayals of their leaders. Others point to the early Christian writings which demonized Jews, or to the persecution of the Jews under Constantine and his successors. Writings from the Talmud make fun of Jesus' birth from a virgin. Then they fervently contest his claim to be the Messiah or the Son of God, and support that he was rightfully executed as a blasphemer and idolater, a blasphemer claiming that he was God. There are many derogatory statements written about Mary, the mother of Jesus, in the Talmud. If you ever get a chance to read some of them, it's interesting. Now there's the Babylonian Talmud, 1st and 2nd century, late 1st century, early 2nd century. It's taught that on the eve of the Passover, this is what was written, they hung Yeshua. And the crier went forth for 40 days beforehand, declaring that Yeshua is to be stoned for practicing witchcraft, for enticing and leading Israel astray. Anyone who knows something to clear him, he asked them to come forth so they could exonerate him. But no one had anything exonerating for him, so they hung him, nailed him on the cross. On the eve of Passover, no one came forward to defend or shield him. Then you have Mara bar Serapion, 73 AD. He was a Stoic philosopher from the Roman province of Syria. Jesus was also known as a good and wise man. Mara, a non-believer, even told that Jesus was wrongfully executed, but that there were consequences for his acts, for what he did, what he said. He wrote a letter to his son. And it's interesting this letter that he wrote, but the commentary aligns directly with the Bible. Marr also wrote that Jesus did not die, but that he lived on through his teaching. Marr was not a Christian, but he spoke highly of Jesus, the King, and Christianity. Pelagian was born in the early 2nd century in the Roman Empire, modern-day Turkey. Pelagian was a Greek historian who lived in the 2nd century and has been referenced by Christian apologists for over 1,000 years, now as confirmation on the events surrounding the crucifixion. Interesting. Thallus, 50 to 75 AD, was a historian who flourished in the middle of the 1st century to the late 2nd century AD. He is occasionally mentioned as a historian in the works of early Christian writers. According to the early Christian scholars, Africanus, Thallus, in the 3rd book of his histories, refers to the darkness at the time of the crucifixion of Jesus and explained it away as a solar eclipse. Now, there's a range of interpretations on this. Nevertheless, he wrote about it, this Jesus. Then we have Pontius Pilate. Oh, yeah, good old Pontius. He was the 5th governor of the Roman province of Judea, serving under Emperor Tiberius from the year 26 to 37 AD. He's best known for being the official who presided over the trial of Jesus and later ordered his crucifixion. Pilate's role in condemning Jesus to death is also attested by Roman historian Tacitus, who, when explaining Nero's persecution of the Christians, explained Christus, now he referred to him as Christus, the founder of the name of Christianity, had undergone the death penalty in the reign of Tiberius by sentence of the procurator Pontius Pilate, and the pernicious superstition was checked for a mere moment. Now, it's interesting that he writes about this because if you go to John chapter 19, verses 17 to 22, you can read, and he, bearing his cross, went out to a place called the place of a skull, which in the Hebrew is called Golgotha, where they crucified him, and they put 2 others with him, one on either side, and Jesus in the center. Now, Pilate wrote a title and put it on the cross, and the writing was, Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. The Jewish high priest read this title, and they were outraged. And they came and they challenged that. They wanted Pilate to take it down. Pilate said, no. What I write, the King of the Jews, I write. What I have written, I have written. Mind you. The question you have to ask, Pilate had to know because of his wife's dream the night before Jesus came before him, where she told him, don't have anything to do with this man's death. But by him putting that sign, did Pilate evangelize at the cross? That's my question. If you think about it, he was proclaiming, like a billboard, that Jesus was truly the King of the Jews. Then as we move up into more modern times, you have Thomas Paine, 1737 to 1809. He was an English-American writer and a political pamphleteer. Nothing here that can be said, even with the most distinct disrespect to the real character of Jesus Christ. He writes, he was a virtuous and amiable man. The morality that he preached and practiced was the most benevolent kind. Although Confucius had preached similar systems of morality, and by some of the Greek philosophers many years before, and by the Quakers since, and by many good men in all the ages, has not been exceeded by any for what Jesus had preached on. Then you have Sir William Mitchell Ramsay, 1851 to 1939. Ramsay was a Scottish archaeologist and a New Testament scholar. By his death in 1939, he had become the foremost authority of his day on the history of Asia Minor and a leading scholar in the study of the New Testament. Ramsay was educated in the Tübingen School of Thought, which doubted the reliability of the New Testament, but his extensive archaeological and historical studies convinced him of its historical accuracy. He concluded that Luke's accounts of and events and settings recorded in the book of Acts were exact, even to the smallest detail. He went from atheism to conversion as a Christian. Then for believers who rely on the shoulders of these giants, the writers of the four Gospels and the books of the New Testament give a different version of Jesus. Now, these come the eyewitnesses. Now let's look at Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, Paul, Peter, Jude, and James. The Roman Catholic Church uses tradition scripture in the magisterium. And deciphering the word. After the Protestant Reformation, scriptures, and then in the Dead Seas, ancient, mostly Hebrew manuscripts of leather, papyrus, and copper, they were first found in 1947 on the northwestern shore of the Dead Sea. Discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls is among the most important finds in the history of modern archaeology. Between 1953 and 1956, Roland de Vaux led 4 archaeological expeditions in the area to uncover the scrolls and the artifacts. Now, Cave 11 was discovered in 1956 and yielded the last fragment to be found in the vicinity of Qumran. The more contemporary theologians we have to answer the question, that is, who was he? To the unbelievers, the atheist, the agnostic, Jesus did not exist. Or did he? He was Lord, a liar, and a lunatic if he didn't, and a madman. If this is true, it would be the worst hoax that God could have allowed to happen to mankind. Today there are over 5,000 writings from within the first 50 years that can be referenced to the New Testament. The mention of Luke's accuracy as historical facts in his writings, the New Testament writings, or records, incidents that could damage reputations, were scandalous or harmful. Jesus called Peter Satan in Matthew 16:23. The disciples constantly misunderstood what Jesus was saying to them in John 13:28. The reason was that the authors wanted to record what actually happened and hide nothing, and they did so. To the believers, Jesus is the Son of God who became the Son of Man at the incarnation. Jesus is the great I am of scriptures, the promised Messiah, the anointed one promised way back in Genesis 3, chapter 3, verse 15. Brings me to Bart Ehrman. Bart Ehrman is an interesting individual. Number one, he subsequently turned into a liberal Christian. Number two, he had spent 15 years in the Episcopalian Church, only to become a born-again evangelical. After that time, he became an agnostic atheist. Okay. This happened because he was struggling with the philosophical problems of evil and suffering. The question we ask now is, what does Mark Ehrman think about Jesus? Mark Ehrman is a historian and Bible expert. He confronts the question, did Jesus exist at all? Ehrman vigorously defends the historical Jesus, identifies the most historically reliable sources for best understanding Jesus' mission, his message, and offers a compelling portrait of the person at the heart of the Christian. So you kind of wonder, how is he an atheist, agnostic? Interesting. Then there's Celsus, Celsus. He was a pagan philosopher, 175 to 181 AD. He accuses Jesus of having invented his birth from a virgin. 2, he scolds him for being born in a Jewish village of a poor woman of the country who gained her sustenance by spitting. 3, she who was turned out of doors by her husband, a carpenter, by trade because she was convicted of adultery. This is what this man wrote. And 4, that after being driven away by her husband and wandering about for a time, she was disgracefully gave birth to Jesus, an illegitimate child. He claims that Jesus hired himself out as a servant in Egypt on account of his poverty. And there he acquired his miraculous powers from the Egyptians, who greatly pride themselves in the magic, the dark side, if you will. Then Jesus returns to his own country, highly elated on the account of them, and by these means he proclaimed himself a God. Well, I say to you that Jesus truly lived and is the Son of God, who became the Son of Man at the incarnation. He was, in fact, a historical being and the promised Messiah, the anointed one from the writings in Genesis chapter 3, verse 15. Think about this. Jesus started out with the 12. And at the time of Paul, the whole Roman world at that time had been Christianized. Today, there's over 2.6 billion Christians in the world. According to the Center for the Study of Global Christianity, and they predict that there will be 3.3 billion Christians by the year of 2050. In conclusion, I want to throw this out there to you about the Shroud of Turin. Regardless of what you know about it or don't know about it or what you believe about it, Dr. Gary Habermas, who is an American New Testament scholar and theologian, who frequently writes and lectures on the resurrection of Jesus. He's an expert on the resurrection. He has specialized in cataloging and communicating trends among scholars in the field of the historical Jesus and the New Testament studies. Dr. Habermas has done much research on the Shroud, and you can view his arguments on his website at www.garyhabermas.com. www.garyhabermas.com. It's going to be interesting viewing. Now, I ask you, if this video has been of any help to you and you find it informative, please contact me and let me know. You can find my contact information on my website, authortonycosta.com. Go to contact Tony or Ron, and the contact information is there. God bless until we meet again. Shalom and Maranatha.